In this video, Korean professor Yi Zong-gu correctly revises the history of Korea previously written and distributed by Japan, and distributes it to the world. Each part takes about 10 minutes, so please watch until the end and then click like. In the past, during Japanese colonial rule, the Japanese wrote Korean history and taught it to Korean and Japanese people, but there were countless false records, not only in Korea-Japan relations, but also in relations with China. They believed that if Korean history were destroyed, Korea would not even think about independence and would remain loyal to Japan. Korea became independent 80 years ago. However, even now, almost all Koreans accept much of this distorted history as correct. Hitler said, "The bigger the lie, the more likely people are to believe it. If you keep repeating a lie, soon many people will accept it as the truth." Is that true? The false history of Korea created by Japan has spread throughout the world, including in China and the United States. And now people who talk about Korea's true history are called chauvinists or nationalists, and people refuse to believe them. However, Dr. John Carter Covell, who has studied the history of both Korea and Japan for his entire life, had doubts about Korean history after receiving his doctorate in Japan. He said, "Talking about the correct Korean history now is like shouting alone in the wilderness." First of all, Japan got rid of Korea's earliest history. Koreans have long known that the first country was Gojoseon and that it was founded in 2333 BC. Its territory included the Korean Peninsula and Manchuria, and westward to the Great Wall of China, or the Yan Mountains, and the Great Shingan Mountains of Inner Mongolia. The northern land border extends approximately to Heilongjiang. An 18th century French priest named Jean-Baptiste Regis was the first to write Chinese history in English, and he also talked about Gojoseon. He published a history of China that included a map, and even though it is 300 years old, I think this map is the oldest one referring to Gojoseon. It is now in the Library of Congress. What you see now is the map of Gojoseon created by organizing all of this. I think this map is trustworthy in that it was created 300 years ago by a French person who had nothing to do with the history of Korea, Japan, or China. The Sukshin, Malgal, and Dongho tribes are indicated within the territory of Gojoseon, which is marked in light green, almost yellow, and the eastern side of the Yan Mountain Range, or the Great Wall of China, is considered Gojoseon. South of the Yan Mountains, that is, the Beijing-Tianjin region and the Shandong Peninsula, the area marked in yellow is described as the land of Gojoseon viewed to its maximum extent. However, in the Korean history written by the Japanese, there was no Gojoseon. They wrote, falsely, that a Chinese man named Gija came to the Korean Peninsula, established a country, and ruled it. Afterward, a Chinese man named Weeman came back and ruled the northern part of the Korean Peninsula, while for the southern part, they also lied and said that Japan ruled their colony, Imla, and it was fabricated to say that this started about 300 years later than the beginning of Japanese history, and that culture passed from Japan to the Korean Peninsula. In the end, it was created as a fiction that Korea's ancient history began with Chinese and Japanese colonies. First, they abolished Gojoseon, the first nation in Korean history. Gojoseon has a clear history and not the incredible oxidation that the Japanese say. I briefly introduce its first history. A long time ago, Hwanung, the son of a concubine of Hwanin, the emperor of heaven, had the will to rule the human world. Knowing this, Hwanin allowed Hwanung to go down to the earthly world and rule it, thinking that it would benefit the human world widely. At this time, Hwanin gave Hwanung Chun Buin, a treasured seal, Cheon Buin Tian Fu Yin, necessary to rule the human world. Hwanung, with a group of 3,000 people, descended under Shindansu at the top of Taebaek Mountain and built a new city. In addition, he took charge of the 360 tasks of the human world, with Pungbaek, Wusa, and Wunsa, controlled grains, lifespan, diseases, punishments, and good and evil, and ruled the people. At this time, a bear and a tiger lived and prayed to the god to become human beings in the same cave. God gave bears and tigers 1 bundle of mugwort and 20 garlics, respectively, and said that if they eat only these and do not see the sunlight for 100 days, they will become human. So they began to eat them. The bear did this for 21 days and became a woman. However, because the tiger could not keep it to the end, it could not become human. Since Wanggeom did not have anyone to marry her, she always prayed to have children under Shen Tan Shu. As a result, Huaneng changed into a person for a while and married her. Wanggeom became pregnant and gave birth to a son. This person is Dangun. In other words, Dangun became the grandson of the emperor who ruled the kingdom of heaven. Any country with a long history has mythical roots. The reason is that the idea of being a chosen people requires mythologizing according to the circumstances of the time. This myth reflects the idea that Koreans were a chosen people after the Iron Age using the wild beasts of northern Asia, the tiger and bear. These myths can be understood in the same context as Japanese, Chinese, Greek, and Roman myths. From 1945, when Korea became independent, to 1950, when the Korean War broke out, there was no room for Koreans to think about history for 5 years. Meanwhile, as North Korea also needed experts in various fields, competent historians were brought from South Korea to North Korea, and the historians who remained in Korea were mainly those who followed Japan's colonial view of history. As they occupied important positions in the government, such as the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Culture's National History Compilation Committee, Korean history repeated the lies of the Japanese colonial period. Korean historians who protested against this first began to organize Gojoseon relics in order to confirm its territory. As a result, the area from the Korean Peninsula to Manchuria, Liaodong, Liaoxi, and the Daksinganling Mountains in eastern Inner Mongolia could be considered the land of Gojoseon. Korean scholars were confused by the discovery of Gojoseon relics in the Shandong Peninsula, which they only knew as Chinese territory, near present-day Beijing, south of the Yan Mountains, and in the Taiyuan region of Shanxi Province. This is because they overlooked the fact that it was very easy to reach Shandong using the sea route from the Liaodong Peninsula, and that there was a narrow road that crossed the northern part of the Yan Mountains. The Yan Mountains, Taihang Mountains, and Yin Mountains that block mainland of China are huge mountain ranges that even cut off culture between the north and south. They can be compared to the Alps in Europe. Even the Chinese could not even trust these rugged mountain ranges, so they sacrificed countless people to build the Great Wall of China. Therefore, the Great Wall of China was a border with the northern peoples created by the Chinese themselves. However, the people that the Chinese called northern barbarians did not necessarily refer only to northern peoples, such as the Mongols or the Xiongnu. What was more important and urgent was the invasion of Gojoseon, or Koreans. In principle, the Huns in Mongolia were nomads, so they did not covet Chinese land, which was only agricultural land except for political reasons. Therefore, the important function of this Great Wall was to prevent an invasion from Gojoseon. In fact, even during the Japanese colonial period, many scholars sacrificed their lives to protect history. Representative figures include Park Yun-sik, Shin Chae-ho, and Zhong In-bo. Although they lost their country and wandered the continent, they were able to see the historical sites and relics of Gojoseon in person. After liberation, China occupied Manchuria and Liaodong and established a strong lockdown policy called the Bamboo Curtain. Before that, China's Qing dynasty was actually ruled by a northern people from Manchuria, descendants of Gojoseon, through the history of Goguryeo, Balhae, Jin, Liao, and later Jin. Meanwhile, important relics of Gojoseon were excavated and opened to the public. A representative example is Hongsan culture. The Hongsan cultural relics are important in resolving Korea's suspicions about Gojoseon territory. It stretched all the way to the southern part of the Korean Peninsula, but relics have been found in China as far away as the Yan Mountains. So Korean historians were able to create maps with confidence. We'll now introduce representative maps. First, this is a map of Yonsei University, a famous private university in Korea. This is a map created by Professor Shin Yong-ha of Seoul National University. There is also guidance from Dankook University Professor Yoon Naehyun. This map was created by Dr. Lee Jirin of North Korea. However, there is controversy because the world-famous Wikipedia still displays maps created by Japan in the past. It proudly displays a map of Gojoseon that was manipulated by Japan according to its colonial view of history. This may be the result of Japan and China's global influence. This phenomenon is what Dr. John Covell, whom I mentioned earlier, described as a voice crying in the wilderness. Thank you.